All right, we are going to study for our test on force and motion. If you remember, we started our unit by talking about work. We can think of work in scientific terms. So when we think of work in scientific terms, we need to remember that work is using a force to move an object a distance. If Miss Call stands up in front of the class and just simply teaches, talks, tells you information, scientifically she is not working. You need to use a force to move an object a distance to have it be considered work. All right, let's move on to what is a force? A force is a push or pull that acts on an object. I'm going to highlight that. A force is a push or a pull that acts on an object. Okay, so we've talked about those things quite a bit, and you guys really did a nice job learning that. So we're going to move on to 3 types of forces. We learned that there are 3 different types of forces. Can you remember what those 3 forces are? 3 types are. The first one is contact or physical force. That is the push or pull that we talked about in class. The second type of force is gravity, and that is that force of attraction between 2 masses. We talked about that gravity is that force that pushes us down and holds us down on the ground. Without that gravity, we would be floating around. We will discuss gravity, as I told you, in more detail in a little bit, but not in this particular unit. Our third type of force is friction, and that is the force that it means that 2 surfaces are rubbing together, and it slows down the motion. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into our study guide. So let's keep moving on here. Friction. We discussed the fact that friction is a force that occurs when 2 objects rub against one another. Now, we've talked about it, and Ms. Call always uses the example of rubbing her hands together. That is one way to remember what it is. But what I want you to also remember about friction is the more friction we have, the more work is needed to create motion, or we need more force. The less friction between 2 objects means the less work is needed to move that object. So if we tried to drive a car, a little toy car on the carpet, we try and push it, we would need a lot more force to push that car than if we rolled it across the smooth floor in our classroom. Think about when we went outside and we rolled the bocce ball in the grass. There was more friction in the grass than there was when we rolled it on the sidewalk. More force. This is something that's very important for you to remember. More friction equals more force. You need to have more force. Less friction equals less force. You need a little less force to push it if you have less friction, if the smoother surfaces are rubbing against one another. All righty, let's move on. Okay, and we talked about the fact that friction slows down the motion. It makes that work harder. All right. I'm going to move on through here. Oh, an example of friction that we discussed were the brakes in your mom and dad's cars. The foot pedal, you have to put force, push on that foot pedal, that brake pedal, in order for it to move the springs to close the brakes. When there is no pressure, no force on the foot pedal, you can see we've got a space in here. All right, and that means that our car can go. We don't have the brakes on. However, when you push down onto that brake pedal, the springs go out against the side here, and they touch, and that is what stops our car, our wheels, from moving. So a good example of friction is the brake in your car, the brakes in your car. All right. Yeah, sorry guys. This call has to stop this now.